Sign here, and you'll never have to worry about money again." The words echoed in my head as I stared at the prenuptial agreement, my hand trembling around the gold pen. 67-year-old Aldric Thornwell sat across from me in his lawyer's office, his steel-gray eyes watching my every move like a hawk studying its prey. The contract stipulated that if I stayed married to him for 5 years, I'd inherit $50 million. If I left before then, I'd get nothing. I thought about my overdue rent, my maxed-out credit cards, my mother's chemotherapy bills that insurance wouldn't cover. 5 years. I could fake loving this ancient fossil for 5 years, couldn't I? Having second thoughts, Indy? Aldric's voice was gravelly, amused. He knew he had me cornered. Not all. I lied smoothly, signing my name with a flourish that looked confident but felt like signing my soul away. Just making sure I understand all the benefits. What I didn't understand was that Aldric Thornwell hadn't built his empire by being naive. And I was about to learn that some contracts come with clauses written in invisible ink. 3 hours later, we were married in a sterile ceremony at City Hall. No family, no friends, just 2 witnesses who worked for Aldric and looked like they'd signed confidentiality agreements thicker than phone books. The whole thing felt less like a wedding and more like a business transaction, which I supposed it was. "Mrs. Thornwell," Aldric said as we stepped out into the afternoon sunlight, and I nearly flinched at the unfamiliar name. "Your new life begins now." If only I'd known how literally he meant that. Hey, my friend, hope you're doing well. Drop a comment and let me know how you're feeling about this story so far and where you are watching from. Some stories are too close to my heart to share on YouTube. I send those, along with little life lessons and surprises, to my email circle. If you'd like to be part of it, you can join with the link in the description. The Thornwell mansion loomed before us like something out of a Gothic novel. 43 rooms, Aldric had mentioned casually, as if everyone had 43 rooms in their house. The iron gates closed behind our limousine with a finality that made my stomach clench. "Welcome home, darling," Aldric said, but there was something in his tone that made the word home sound more like prison. The staff lined up in the foyer to meet me. Cordelia, the stern-faced housekeeper who looked like she could kill a man with her disapproving stare. Jasper, the groundskeeper whose knowing smirk suggested he'd seen this exact scenario play out before. And Verity, a young woman about my age who Aldric introduced as his personal assistant. Verity's handshake lingered a moment too long, her green eyes studying my face with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "So you're the new Mrs. Thornwell," she said, her voice honey-sweet with an edge sharp enough to cut glass. "How fortunate for you." There was something in that pause, something in the way she said "fortunate," that felt like a warning. But I was too busy calculating $50 million divided by 5 years to pay attention to subtleties. That night, Aldric showed me to my bedroom. Not our bedroom. My bedroom. "This marriage is a business arrangement," he said matter-of-factly. "I expect discretion, dignity, and compliance with the household rules. Cordelia will provide you with a copy in the morning." Household rules? What was this? Military school. "And, Indy," he said, pausing at the door, "don't mistake my age for weakness. I've buried more than one person who tried to cheat me." The door closed with a soft click, and I was alone in a room larger than my entire previous apartment, surrounded by luxury that felt more like beautiful bars on a gilded cage. I should have been celebrating. I'd gone from broke to billionaire's wife in a single day. But as I lay in Egyptian cotton sheets that probably cost more than my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just made the biggest mistake of my life. The feeling would prove prophetic. 3 months into my new life as Mrs. Thornwell, I'd settled into what I thought was a comfortable routine. I woke up whenever I wanted, spent my days by the pool or shopping with Aldric's black card, and attended the occasional charity event where I smiled and played the loving wife while Aldric worked the room like the calculating predator he was. The prenup had included a generous monthly allowance, and I'd been systematically paying off my mother's medical bills and my own debts. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't stressed about money. I should have been happy. But happiness had a way of being elusive in the Thornwell mansion. The household rules Cordelia had given me that first morning weren't suggestions. They were commandments carved in stone. No guests without prior approval. No leaving the estate after 10 p.m. without Aldric's permission. No access to Aldric's study, the basement, or the east wing. No fraternization with staff. Daily reports to Cordelia about my activities. I'd laughed when I first read them. Who did Aldric think he was, my father? But when I tried to ignore them, I'd learned quickly that Cordelia enforced these rules with military precision. The first time I tried to slip out for a late-night drive, I'd found the gates locked and Jasper standing guard with arms crossed, and a look that suggested I should reconsider my choices. "It's for your safety, Mrs. Thornwell," Cordelia had explained in her clipped voice. "Mr. Thornwell has many enemies. We can't have you wandering around unprotected." Enemies. The word sent a chill down my spine. What kind of business empire required thinking about enemies? I'd started to understand that Aldric Thornwell wasn't just wealthy. He was powerful in ways that made people nervous. The charity events we attended were filled with politicians, judges, and business leaders who spoke to him with a combination of respect and fear. They smiled when they shook his hand, but their eyes held the wariness of prey animals who knew they were in the presence of an apex predator. And I was beginning to suspect that I wasn't his wife so much as I was his latest acquisition. The realization hit me fully on a Thursday afternoon when I overheard a phone conversation that I wasn't meant to hear. I'd been looking for Aldric to ask permission to visit my mother because apparently I needed permission for that too, and I'd found his study door slightly ajar. His voice carried through the crack, speaking in low, urgent tones. "The Castellanos contract needs to be resolved permanently," he was saying. "I don't care how you handle it, but make sure it can't be traced back to us." A chill ran through me. That didn't sound like normal business talk. "What about your wife?" another voice asked. I recognized it as Jasper's gravelly tone. "She's been asking questions about the East Wing." "Indy is exactly as naive as she appears," Aldric replied, and I heard the dismissive amusement in his voice. "She married me for money, and she'll keep quiet to keep the money flowing. Women like her are predictable." Women like her. The phrase hit me like a physical blow. "Besides," Aldric continued, "if she becomes a problem, we have contingencies." The last Mrs. Thornwell learned that lesson the hard way. My blood turned to ice water. The last Mrs. Thornwell? I backed away from the door as quietly as possible, my heart hammering so loud I was sure they could hear it downstairs. Aldric had been married before? Why hadn't that come up during our courtship, if you could call 3 dinners and a contract signing a courtship? That evening at dinner, I decided to test the waters. "Aldric," I said, cutting into the perfectly prepared salmon that I could barely taste. I was curious about something. "Have you been married before?" His fork paused halfway to his mouth, and for just a moment I saw something flash across his face. Anger? Fear? Then his expression smoothed into its usual mask of controlled amusement. "What an odd question, darling. What brought that on?" "Just curious. I realize I don't know much about your past." "My past is exactly that, past. I prefer to focus on the present." He took a sip of wine, his eyes never leaving my face. "Is there something specific you're concerned about?" The weight of his stare made me feel like a butterfly pinned to a board. "No, of course not. Just making conversation." "Good," he said, and the single word carried more threat than an entire speech might have. "I'd hate for you to develop unhealthy curiosities." That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. I pulled out my phone and started searching Aldric Thornwell, previous wife, but found nothing. Then I tried Thornwell family and Thornwell marriage, with similarly sparse results. For a billionaire, Aldric kept a remarkably low digital profile. But I did find one thing, a newspaper article from 7 years ago about a car accident. Vivian Castell Thornwell, age 32, had died when her car went off a cliff on a mountain road outside the city. She'd been driving home from a charity event, and investigators had blamed the crash on poor weather and dangerous road conditions. The article mentioned that she was survived by her husband, Aldric Thornwell, prominent businessman and philanthropist. The photograph accompanying the article made my hands shake. Vivian had been beautiful, long, dark hair, bright smile, wearing an elegant black dress. She looked happy, radiant even. She looked nothing like me, except for one thing. The article mentioned that she'd been 32 when she died. I was 26 now, and our marriage contract was for 5 years, which would make me 31 when the contract ended. 1 year younger than Vivian had been when she died. I told myself I was being paranoid, that coincidences happened all the time. But as I finally drifted off to sleep, I couldn't shake Aldric's words from earlier. The last Mrs. Thornwell learned that lesson the hard way. What lesson had Vivian learned? And how hard had the way been? The next morning brought my first real crisis as Mrs. Thornwell, and it came in the form of my younger sister Blue showing up at the front gates, crying and desperate. "Indy, thank God," she sobbed when Cordelia reluctantly led her to the morning room where I was having coffee. I didn't know where else to go. Blue looked terrible. Her usually perfect blonde hair was tangled, her mascara streaked down her cheeks, and she was wearing the same clothes I'd seen her in 3 days ago. My protective instincts kicked in immediately. "What happened? Are you hurt?" I pulled her into a hug, not caring that we were violating about 6 different household rules by having this conversation without prior approval. "It's Kieran," she whispered, and my blood ran cold. Kieran Maddox was Blue's on-and-off boyfriend, a small-time dealer who'd been trouble since the day they met. He got into something big, Indy. Something really bad. She pulled back to look at me, and I saw genuine terror in her eyes. "He owes money to some seriously scary people, and he gave them my name as collateral. They came to my apartment last night, said if he doesn't pay up by Friday, they're going to kill us both." "How much money?" I asked, though I already dreaded the answer. $200,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. Even with my generous allowance, I didn't have access to that kind of cash without Aldric's approval. And somehow I doubted he'd be sympathetic to my drug-dealing boyfriend of my sister's financial troubles. "Please, Indy." Blue gripped my hands desperately. "You married this rich guy. $200,000 is nothing to him, right? It's pocket change. And Kieran promised he'd get clean if we help him this time. He just needs a chance." I wanted to point out that Kieran had promised to get clean approximately 17 times in the past 2 years, but Blue's terror was real and immediate. These weren't people who made idle threats. "Let me talk to Aldric," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Maybe we can work something out." Blue's face lit up with hope that made my chest ache. "Really? You'll help us?" "I'll try," I promised, praying I wasn't about to make everything worse. But before I could even figure out how to approach Aldric with this request, Cordelia appeared in the doorway with a kind of expression that suggested someone was about to have a very bad day. "Mrs. Thornwell," she said coldly, "Mr. Thornwell requires your immediate presence in his study. Alone." The emphasis on that last word made it clear that Blue's visit hadn't gone unnoticed. I squeezed my sister's hand reassuringly and followed Cordelia through the maze of hallways to Aldric's study, my stomach twisting with each step. Aldric was seated behind his massive oak desk, but he wasn't alone. Jasper stood by the window, and Verity sat in one of the leather chairs facing the desk, a tablet in her lap and a smug expression on her face. "Sit down, Indy," Aldric said without looking up from the document he was reading. His voice was calm, almost casual, which somehow made it more terrifying than if he'd been shouting. I sat in the chair next to Verity, acutely aware that this felt less like a conversation and more like a tribunal. "It seems," Aldric continued, finally raising his eyes to meet mine, "that you've forgotten some of our household rules already. Guests require prior approval. Personal business should be conducted through proper channels. And family drama should be kept far away from my home." "Aldric, please let me explain." "I've already been explained to," he cut me off smoothly. "Your sister's boyfriend has gambling debts to some rather unpleasant individuals. Individuals who, coincidentally, have had business dealings with me in the past." My blood turned to ice. "Business dealings?" Aldric's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "The same people threatening your sister work for Victor Kozlov, who runs certain entrepreneurial ventures in this city. Victor and I have what you might call a professional relationship." "Professional relationship?" The euphemism hung in the air like a poison cloud. Which means, Aldric continued, that your sister's problem just became my problem. And I don't like having problems, Indy. Verity leaned forward slightly, and I caught the glint of satisfaction in her eyes. She'd been the one to report Blue's visit, I realized. She'd been watching, waiting for me to make a mistake. However, Aldric said, his voice taking on that deceptively reasonable tone that I was beginning to recognize as his most dangerous mood, I'm prepared to resolve this situation. Victor owes me several favors, and I can have your sister's debt forgiven with a single phone call. Relief flooded through me so powerfully that I nearly cried. Thank you, Aldric. I know I shouldn't have. I'm not finished. The words cracked like a whip, cutting off my gratitude. My assistance comes with conditions. Of course it did. Nothing in Aldric Thornwell's world was free. First, he said, counting off on his fingers, your sister will have no further contact with Kieran Maddox. If she sees him again, the debt goes back into effect, with interest. I nodded quickly. That actually seemed reasonable. Second, you will have no further unsupervised contact with your family. All visits, phone calls, and communication will be monitored and approved in advance. My heart sank, but I nodded again. I could work with that. And third, Aldric said, his eyes glittering with something that might have been amusement, you'll provide me with certain services that weren't explicitly outlined in our original contract. The room went dead silent. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. What kind of services? I asked, though I was afraid I already knew. Aldric's smile widened. Let's just say that our marriage will become more traditional in certain respects. You're a beautiful woman, Indy, and I've been remarkably patient. But patience has its limits. The implication hit me like a physical blow. He was talking about sex, about making our fake marriage real in the most intimate way possible. And if I refuse? I asked quietly. Then your sister dies, Aldric said with casual brutality. Victor's people don't make empty threats, darling. They're quite creative when it comes to collecting debts. I stared at him, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time since we'd met. This wasn't a lonely old man looking for companionship. This was a predator who'd been playing a long game, maneuvering me into exactly this position. You planned this, I whispered. You knew about Kieran. You knew this would happen. Aldric's expression didn't change, but Verity let out a soft laugh. Did you really think you were special? She asked mockingly. That Aldric Thornwell just happened to meet some random broke girl and fell instantly in love? Verity, Aldric said mildly, but there was a warning in his tone. She deserves to know, Verity continued, clearly enjoying my growing horror. We've been watching your family for months. Your sister's addiction, your mother's medical bills, your complete lack of resources or prospects. You were selected, Indy, chosen for your desperation and your naivety. The room spun around me. Selected for what? For exactly this moment, Aldric said, his voice gentle now in a way that was somehow more terrifying than his earlier threats. You see, darling, I have very specific needs that require very specific circumstances. A wife who can't leave. A wife who has no choice but to comply with whatever I require. I thought about Vivian, about the newspaper article, about the car going off the cliff. What happened to your first wife? Something flickered across Aldric's face. Annoyance, perhaps, or disappointment. Vivian developed inconvenient moral objections to certain aspects of our arrangement. She threatened to go to the authorities with information that could have been problematic for my business interests. So you killed her. I defended myself, Aldric corrected calmly. Sometimes people leave us no choice in how we handle difficult situations. The casual admission of murder hit me like a sledgehammer. I was sitting in a room with a man who'd killed his previous wife, discussing the terms under which he might not kill me. Now then, Aldric continued as if we'd been discussing the weather. Do we have an agreement? Your sister's life for your compliance. I looked around the room. At Jasper by the window, obviously armed and ready to ensure I didn't try to leave. At Verity, who was watching my breakdown with obvious enjoyment. At Aldric, who held my sister's life in his hands like it was a poker chip. I need to see Blue, I said finally. I need to make sure she's safe. Of course, Aldric said magnanimously. Jasper will escort you both to a secure location where she can stay while we finalize our new arrangement. Consider it a honeymoon suite for siblings. A secure location. Another prison, in other words. I stood on trembling legs, my mind racing through possibilities and finding nothing but dead ends. Aldric held all the cards, and he knew it. "Oh, and Indy?" Aldric called as I reached the door. "Don't even think about trying to contact the police or anyone else for help. Victor's people have connections throughout law enforcement, and I have friends in very high places. Any attempt to involve outside authorities will result in not just your sister's death, but your mother's as well." My mother. I'd forgotten that he knew about her, about the medical bills I'd been paying with his money. Of course, he had leverage over her too. "Welcome to your real marriage, Mrs. Thornwell," Verity said sweetly. "I think you're going to find it much more engaging than your previous arrangement." I walked out of that study knowing that the naive girl who'd signed a prenup 3 months ago was gone forever. In her place was someone who would have to be much smarter, much stronger, and much more dangerous if she wanted to survive. Because I was beginning to understand that this wasn't just about money anymore. This was about something much darker, much more twisted than a simple marriage of convenience. And somewhere in this mansion was the truth about what had really happened to Vivian. The secure location, where Jasper took Blue and me, turned out to be a penthouse apartment in downtown that felt more like a luxury prison than a safe house. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning view of the city, but I noticed immediately that the windows were bulletproof and didn't open. The doors required key card access, and there were cameras in every room except the bathrooms. "This is incredible," Blue breathed, running her fingers over the marble countertops in the kitchen. "Indy, your husband really came through for us." I didn't have the heart to tell her the true price of Aldric's generosity. Not yet. She was already fragile, and the truth might break her completely. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "He's very generous." Jasper positioned himself in the living room with a clear line of sight to the front door, making it obvious that we were guests in name only. When I asked if we could go for a walk, he shook his head politely but firmly. "Mr. Thornwell's orders, Mrs. Thornwell. You're to remain here until he arrives tomorrow evening." Tomorrow evening. Which meant I had less than 24 hours to figure out how to get both Blue and myself out of this nightmare. That night, after Blue had fallen asleep in the master bedroom, I found myself standing at those bulletproof windows, staring out at the city lights, and trying to process everything that had happened. My marriage had been a lie from day one. Aldric was connected to organized crime. My sister's life was hanging by a thread. And I was expected to play the role of willing wife to a man who'd murdered his previous spouse. The smart thing would be to run. Take Blue and disappear, change our names, start over somewhere far away. But Aldric had made it clear that his reach extended far beyond the city limits, and he still had leverage over our mother. I was so lost in my thoughts that I almost didn't hear the soft tap on the window. I spun around, heart hammering, but saw nothing in the darkened living room. Jasper was asleep in his chair, and Blue's soft snores carried from the bedroom. Then the tapping came again, more insistent this time. Moving carefully to avoid waking Jasper, I pressed my face to the glass and looked down. 20 stories below, the street was empty except for late-night traffic. But when I looked across to the building opposite, I saw a figure on a balcony, using what looked like a laser pointer to create dots of light on my window. The dots formed letters, HELPYOU. My breath fogged the glass as I stared in disbelief. Someone was trying to communicate with me. Someone who knew I needed help. The figure raised what looked like binoculars, and I instinctively stepped back from the window. But then curiosity overcame caution, and I moved closer again. The laser dots appeared again, TRUSDME. Trust me. 2 words that could either save my life or get me killed. I looked back at Jasper, still sleeping soundly in his chair. Making a split-second decision, I held up my hands and signed back using gestures. WHOEREYU? The response came quickly. FRIND OFVNE. My blood turned to ice. Vivian, Aldric's dead wife. Before I could respond, the figure vanished from the balcony, leaving me staring at empty darkness. I waited at the window for another hour, but whoever it was didn't return. I spent the rest of the night lying awake, staring at the ceiling and wondering if I'd imagined the entire encounter. But as dawn broke over the city, I knew I hadn't. Someone out there knew about Vivian, knew about my situation, and was offering help. The question was, could I trust them? The next evening, Aldric arrived at the penthouse with Verity in tow, both of them dressed like they'd come from a business dinner. Which, knowing Aldric, they probably had. "Good evening, ladies," Aldric said, his voice warm and friendly, as if we were old friends catching up instead of captives awaiting our fate. "I trust you've been comfortable?" "Very," Blue said quickly, and I could hear the gratitude in her voice. She still believed Aldric was her savior. "Thank you so much for helping us, Mr. Thornwell. I promise this will never happen again." "I'm sure it won't," Aldric agreed, though his eyes were on me when he said it. "Now then, Blue, Verity is going to take you to another location where you'll be safe while Indy and I work out the details of your situation." "Another location?" I asked sharply. "Where?" "Somewhere secure," Verity said, her tone suggesting that questions weren't welcome. "Don't worry, Indy. We'll take very good care of her." The emphasis on very good care made my skin crawl. I wanted to refuse, to demand that Blue stay with me, but I could see Jasper's hand resting casually on his jacket, reminding me that I wasn't in a position to make demands. "It's okay, Indy," Blue said, squeezing my hand. "I trust Mr. Thornwell. He saved our lives." If only she knew what it was going to cost us. After Blue left with Verity, Aldric and I were alone except for Jasper, who'd positioned himself by the door like a guard dog. "Now then, darling," Aldric said, settling into one of the leather chairs with the casual confidence of a man who owned everything he could see. "Shall we discuss the terms of our new arrangement?" I remained standing, unwilling to give him the psychological advantage of looking down at me. "What exactly do you want from me?" "Direct." "I like that." Aldric smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Very well. My business interests require certain social connections. Political fundraisers, charity events, intimate dinners with influential people. You'll accompany me to these functions as my devoted wife." That didn't sound so terrible. And you'll be my ears in conversations I'm not part of. Wealthy wives often share information with each other that their husbands prefer to keep private. You'll cultivate friendships with the right women and report back to me. Industrial espionage disguised as girl talk. Still not the worst thing I could imagine. What else? Aldric's smile widened, and I felt my stomach drop. "You'll also provide certain intelligence on people who interest me. Background information, personal habits, family connections, financial situations. Consider yourself my reconnaissance specialist." "You want me to spy on people." "I want you to be observant and social. Very different things." "And if I refuse?" Aldric gestured to Jasper, who pulled out his phone and showed me a video. My breath caught in my throat when I recognized Blue's face on the screen. She was in what looked like a nice hotel room, apparently safe and comfortable. But there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Fear. "Your sister is a lovely girl," Aldric said conversationally. "It would be a shame if something happened to her, because of your stubbornness." The video switched to show another room, this one clearly in a medical facility. My mother lay in a hospital bed, looking frilier than I'd seen her in months. The timestamp on the video was from today. "Your mother's cancer treatment is quite expensive," Aldric continued. "Fortunately, I've been able to arrange for her to receive care at one of the finest private facilities in the country. The doctors there are world-renowned, though they can be selective about their patient roster." The threat was clear. Comply or watch my family suffer. "I understand," I said quietly, hating how small my voice sounded. "Excellent. Now, about the more personal aspects of our arrangement." This was the part I'd been dreading. "We'll start slowly," Aldric said, his tone becoming almost gentle. "Dinner dates, public displays of affection, sharing a bedroom when we have overnight guests. Nothing too demanding initially. Initially, The word hung in the air like a sword. And eventually, our marriage will become real in every sense of the word. But I'm not a barbarian, Indy. I prefer willing partners to unwilling ones. You'll find that I can be quite persuasive when I put my mind to it. The thought of this man touching me made my skin crawl, but I forced myself to nod. I understand. Good. Now, there's one more thing. Aldric reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. Your wedding ring was rather modest for a woman of your new status. I thought an upgrade was in order. He opened the box to reveal a massive diamond ring that probably cost more than most people's houses. But as he slipped it onto my finger, I noticed something else, a thin band of metal around the inside that felt oddly warm against my skin. It's beautiful, I lied, staring down at the ostentatious display of wealth on my hand. It's also equipped with GPS tracking, Aldric said casually. I do hope you understand that it's for your protection. A woman in your position can never be too careful about her safety. Protection. Right. There's also a small transmitter that allows me to monitor your heart rate and stress levels, Aldric continued. Think of it as a health monitor. I'll know immediately if you're in distress, or if I was lying, trying to escape, or planning something he wouldn't approve of. Now then, Aldric said, standing and smoothing down his jacket. We have a charity gala tomorrow night. Your first official appearance as the new and improved Mrs. Thornwell. Verity will brief you on the guest list and what information I'm particularly interested in obtaining. He moved toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Indy? Don't even think about trying to contact that person who was signaling to you from the building across the street last night. My security team is quite thorough in their surveillance. My blood turned to ice. He knew about the mysterious figure with the laser pointer. I have no idea what you're talking about, I said, but my voice betrayed me with a slight tremor. Aldric's smile was cold and knowing. Of course you don't, darling. But if you did, you might want to remember that people who try to help you have a tendency to meet unfortunate accidents. Just ask Vivian's brother. Vivian's brother, the mysterious figure, had claimed to be a friend of Vivian's. Had they been family? Sweet dreams, Mrs. Thornwell, Aldric said, and then he was gone, leaving me alone with Jasper and the weight of everything I'd just agreed to. I looked down at the massive diamond on my finger, feeling the weight of the tracker inside the band. It was beautiful and expensive, and it felt exactly like a shackle. Tomorrow night, I would begin my new role as Aldric's spy and eventual lover. Tomorrow night, I would smile and laugh and charm information out of people who trusted me. Tomorrow night, I would become someone I didn't recognize. But tonight, in the darkness of this luxury prison, I made myself a promise. I would find out what really happened to Vivian. I would figure out who had tried to contact me. And somehow, some way, I would find a way to save my family and myself from Aldric Thornwell, even if it killed me. The charity gala was a glittering affair held in the ballroom of the city's most exclusive hotel. I stood at Aldric's side in a midnight blue gown that cost more than I used to make in 6 months, playing the part of the devoted wife, while my mind catalogued every face, every conversation, every detail that might prove useful later. You're doing beautifully, Verity murmured in my ear as we moved through the crowd. She was dressed as a server tonight, invisible to the wealthy elite who never really saw the help anyway. Senator Morrison's wife has been watching you all evening. She's curious about the mysterious new Mrs. Thornwell. I spotted the senator's wife across the room, an elegant woman in her 50s with shrewd eyes and the kind of jewelry that suggested she had access to information worth more than diamonds. What does Aldric want to know about her? I asked quietly. Her husband is pushing for new regulations that could impact some of Mr. Thornwell's business interests. We need to know how committed he is to the legislation and what might persuade him to reconsider his position. In other words, what skeletons were in the Morrison family closet that could be used for blackmail. I made my way across the room, champagne glass in hand, wearing the practiced smile I'd perfected over the past few weeks. But as I approached Senator Morrison's wife, something unexpected happened. Mrs. Thornwell, she said before I could introduce myself. Helena Morrison. I've been hoping to meet you all evening. Please call me Indy, I said, extending my hand. Her handshake was firm, confident, and she held my gaze a moment longer than necessary. What an unusual name, she said. Short for independence, perhaps? There was something in her tone, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. That's right. My parents were idealistic. Independence, Helena repeated thoughtfully. How fitting. Tell me, my dear, are you familiar with the story of Vivian Castell? My champagne glass nearly slipped from my fingers. Around us, the gala continued. Laughter and music and the clink of crystal. But suddenly it felt like Helena and I were alone in a bubble of dangerous conversation. I'm sorry, I managed. Vivian Castell Thornwell, Helena clarified, her eyes never leaving my face. Your husband's previous wife. Tragic story. Such a promising young woman, cut down in her prime. She knew. Somehow, this senator's wife knew about Vivian, and she was testing me. Aldric doesn't like to talk about the past, I said carefully. I'm sure he doesn't. Helena's smile was sharp as a blade. But the past has a way of catching up with us, doesn't it? Especially when the past involves certain irregularities in police reports. Before I could respond, she pressed something into my hand, small, hard, barely noticeable to anyone watching. The ladies' powder room on the 3rd floor, she murmured. 10 minutes. Then she was gone, gliding away into the crowd as if our conversation had never happened. I looked down at my hand and saw a small key, old-fashioned and brass. My heart was hammering, so hard I was sure the tracker in my ring would alert Aldric to my distress. I needed to calm down to think clearly. But Helena Morrison clearly knew something about Vivian's death, and this might be my only chance to learn the truth. I caught Verity's eye and nodded toward the ladies' room, the universal signal for a bathroom break. She nodded back, distracted by her surveillance duties. The 3rd floor of the hotel was quieter, dimmer, clearly not part of the main event spaces. I found the powder room easily enough, an elegant space with antique mirrors and silk wallpaper. It appeared empty, but as I approached the vanity, Helena emerged from one of the stalls. You came, she said, sounding relieved. I wasn't sure you would. What do you know about Vivian? I asked without preamble. There was no time for social niceties. I know she didn't die in a car accident, Helena said bluntly. And I know you're in terrible danger. She moved to the far wall and used the key I'd given her to open what looked like a decorative panel. Behind it was a small safe. Vivian was my niece, Helena said as she worked the combination. My sister's daughter. Beautiful, intelligent, and far too trusting for her own good. Niece. That explained how she knew so much. She married Aldric for the same reasons you did, I suspect. Financial desperation, family pressure, the promise of security. Helena pulled a manila folder from the safe. But Vivian discovered what kind of man she'd really married. She handed me the folder, and I opened it with trembling hands. Inside were photographs, documents, newspaper clippings, and a letter in elegant handwriting. Read it, Helena urged. The letter was dated 6 months before Vivian's death. My dearest Aunt Helena, if you're reading this, then my worst fears have come true, and I'm no longer alive to tell this story myself. I'm writing this as insurance, proof of what I've discovered about my husband. Aldric Thornwell is not just a businessman. He's the head of a money laundering operation that spans 3 countries. The charity events, the political donations, the real estate investments, they're all fronts for washing money from drug trafficking, human smuggling, and worse. I have evidence. Bank records, photographs, recorded conversations. I've hidden copies in 3 different locations, and I've given you the key to one of them. But more than that, I've discovered that I'm not his first wife to stumble onto the truth. There was another before me, Catalina Vasquez. She supposedly died in a skiing accident in Switzerland 5 years ago. But I found records suggesting she was planning to go to the authorities about Aldric's activities just before her death. I'm scared, Helena. Aldric has been watching me more closely lately. He knows I've been asking questions. Last night, he told me about his contingency plans for dealing with disloyal wives. If something happens to me, Please don't let him find another victim. The man is a monster wearing a gentleman's mask. All my love. Vivian. P.S. The key opens a storage unit at Secure Space on Elm Street. Unit 247. Everything is there. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the letter. 2 wives. Aldric had killed 2 wives who discovered his secrets. Why didn't you go to the police? I asked. Helena's laugh was bitter. With what proof? Vivian died before she could retrieve the evidence she'd hidden. I've been searching for it ever since. She pulled out more documents, police reports, autopsy findings, insurance claims. Look at the patterns, she said. 3 women, all married to wealthy older men connected to suspicious business dealings. All dead within 5 years of marriage. All killed in ways that could plausibly be accidents. I stared at the documents, my mind reeling. You think there are others? I think Aldric Thornwell has perfected a very specific type of murder. He finds desperate women, marries them, uses them until they become liabilities, then eliminates them and moves on to the next victim. The next victim. Me. How did you know to approach me tonight? I asked. I've been watching Aldric since Vivian's death, waiting for him to make his next move. When he married you, I knew I had to act fast. Helena gripped my shoulders. Indy, you have to get that evidence from the storage unit. It's the only way to bring him down. I can't, I said desperately. He's tracking me. He has my sister, my mother. If I try to run. Then we don't run, Helena interrupted. We fight back. Before I could ask what she meant, my phone buzzed with a text from Verity. Where are you? Aldric is asking questions. I have to go, I said, terror flooding through me. Wait. Helena grabbed my arm. There's something else you need to know. The person who tried to contact you at the penthouse, that was my son, Detective Raphael Morrison. He's been investigating Aldric unofficially, building a case. Detective Morrison. A cop was trying to help me. Can I trust him? With your life, Helena said firmly. But be careful. Aldric has connections everywhere, including law enforcement. I stuffed the documents back into the folder and handed it to Helena. Keeping them would be too dangerous. How do I contact your son? You don't. He'll contact you when it's safe. Helena moved back to the safe and locked it. But Indy, whatever you do, don't let Aldric consummate your marriage. Once he has that level of control over you, once you're completely isolated and dependent on him, it will be much harder to escape. Too late, I thought but didn't say. Aldric had already made it clear that our physical relationship was non-negotiable. I slipped out of the powder room and made my way back to the gala, my mind spinning with everything I'd learned. As I rejoined the party, I spotted Aldric across the room, deep in conversation with a man I didn't recognize. But he looked up as if he could sense my presence, and our eyes met across the crowded ballroom. His smile was warm and loving for anyone watching, but I could see the calculation behind it. He knew I'd been gone longer than a simple bathroom break required. There you are, darling, he said when I reached his side. I was beginning to worry. Sorry, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I ran into someone I knew from college. You know how those conversations can drag on. Of course. Aldric's arm slipped around my waist, possessive and threatening. Did you have a productive evening? He was asking about my spying mission, but all I could think about was Vivian's letter, the evidence hidden in a storage unit, the pattern of dead wives. Very productive, I lied smoothly. I have lots to tell you. Excellent. I do so enjoy our debriefings. As the evening wound down and we prepared to leave, I caught Helena Morrison's eye one last time across the room. She gave me the subtlest of nods, encouragement, solidarity, a reminder that I wasn't as alone as I'd thought. But as Aldric's hand tightened on my waist and we walked toward the exit, I couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. He was getting more possessive, more controlling. And, according to Vivian's timeline, I had less than 4 years before I became too much of a liability to keep alive. For years to gather evidence, save my family, and bring down a man who'd already murdered at least 3 women. For years to become someone strong enough to survive a war with a monster. As our limousine pulled away from the hotel, Aldric's hand found mine. his thumb rubbing over the tracker disguised as a wedding ring. "You seem tense, darling," he said softly. "Is everything all right?" "Just tired," I said. "It's been a long evening." "Indeed it has. But very successful, I think. You're becoming quite the asset, Indy." "Asset. Not wife, not partner. Asset." "I'm glad I can be useful," I said, and meant it in ways he couldn't imagine. Because if Aldric Thornwell thought he could use me like he'd used Vivian and Catalina, he was about to learn that some assets had a way of becoming liabilities. And some victims had a way of becoming predators. The next few weeks fell into a routine that would have seemed luxurious to an outside observer, but felt increasingly like psychological torture. Days were filled with shopping trips and spa appointments and lunch dates with the wives of powerful men, during which I gathered intelligence for Aldric's various schemes. Evenings were spent at dinner parties and cultural events, playing the role of the devoted wife while cataloging secrets and weaknesses. And every night, I returned to the mansion knowing I was one day closer to whatever ultimate fate Aldric had planned for me. The most disturbing part was how good I was getting at it. The spying, the manipulation, the careful extraction of information from people who trusted me. I was developing skills I'd never wanted, becoming someone I barely recognized. "You're natural," Verity said after a particularly successful intelligence gathering session with the mayor's wife. We were in Aldric's study, delivering our report while he sat behind his massive desk like a king receiving tribute. "Mrs. Chun told you things about her husband's upcoming vote that even his chief of staff doesn't know." Aldric nodded approvingly. "The information about the harbor development project will be quite valuable." "Well done, Indy. I should have felt sick about betraying Mrs. Chen's trust. Instead, I felt a twisted sense of pride in my growing competence. It was a reaction that terrified me more than Aldric's threats ever had. "There's something else," I said, deciding to test the boundaries of my new role. "Mrs. Chun mentioned that her husband has been having meetings with FBI agents. Something about a federal investigation into city contracts." Aldrich's expression didn't change, but I caught the slight tightening around his eyes. "What kind of investigation?" She wasn't sure, but she seemed worried about it. "I see." Aldric was quiet for a long moment, his fingers steepled as he considered this information. "Verity, I want you to arrange a meeting with our friend at the federal building. It seems we need to expand our information network." Our friend at the federal building. Aldric had contacts inside the FBI. The scope of his corruption was staggering. "Of course," Verity said, making notes on her tablet. "Should I also increase surveillance on Mayor Chin?" "Definitely." "And Indy," Aldric turned to me with that smile that never reached his eyes. "You've earned a reward for your excellent work." A reward. In Aldric's world, that could mean anything from jewelry to a night out to something much more sinister. "Tomorrow evening, we're having dinner with a very important client of mine," he continued. "Viktor Kozlov." My blood turned to ice. Viktor Kozlov, the man whose people had been threatening blue before Aldric intervened. The man Aldric had described as having a professional relationship with him. "I thought it was time you met the man who helped save your sister's life," Aldric said, his tone casual, but his eyes watchful. "I'm sure you'll want to thank him personally." It was a test, I realized. A test of my loyalty, my commitment to this new life, my willingness to play along with whatever game Aldric was orchestrating. "Of course," I said. "I'd be honored to meet him." "Excellent. Viktor is particular about social niceties. I trust you'll make a good impression." The next evening, Viktor Kozlov arrived at the mansion with an entourage that looked like they'd stepped out of a gangster movie. 3 men in expensive suits with the kind of faces that suggested violence was their primary profession, and Viktor himself, a man in his 60s with silver hair, cold blue eyes, and the bearing of someone accustomed to being feared. "Aldric, my friend," Viktor said in accented English, embracing Aldric like they were old associates. "And this must be the beautiful wife I've heard so much about." He took my hand and kissed it in an old-world gesture that might have seemed charming if not for the calculation in his eyes as he assessed me. "Mrs. Thornwell," he said, "I understand I was able to be of service to your family recently." "Yes," I managed. Thank you for your help with my sister's situation. Victor's smile revealed teeth that were too white and too sharp. Family is important. We do whatever is necessary to protect the people we love, yes. The emphasis on whatever is necessary sent a chill down my spine. Dinner was an education in the intersection of legitimate business and organized crime. Victor and Aldric discussed shipping contracts and real estate investments and political donations with the casual ease of men who'd done business together for years. But underneath the civilized conversation was a current of violence, of threat, of power exercised through fear. The harbor project you mentioned, Victor said over the main course. My people are very interested in the cleanup contracts. Of course, Aldric replied, though there may be some federal complications. Nothing we can't handle, but it will require careful management. Your contacts in law enforcement are reliable. Completely. We've been cultivating those relationships for years. I listened to them discuss bribing federal agents and manipulating contracts like they were planning a charity fundraiser, all while maintaining the pretense of a friendly dinner party. Your wife is very quiet, Victor observed, turning his attention to me. In my experience, quiet women are either very wise or very dangerous. Indy is still learning the intricacies of my business, Aldric said smoothly. But she's proven to be quite adaptable. Adaptation is survival, Victor agreed. My first wife, rest her soul, never learned to adapt. It was very sad when she had her accident. Accident. The word hung in the air like a threat. Victor's first wife had suffered an accident too. Tell me, Mrs. Thornwell, Victor continued. What do you think of your new life? Very different from your previous circumstances, I imagine. Very different, I agreed carefully. I'm grateful for the opportunities it's provided. Opportunities, Victor repeated. Yes, marriage can provide many opportunities. For wealth, for security, for learning about the world. His smile was predatory. But it also provides opportunities for mistakes. Don't you agree, Aldric? Indeed, Aldric said. Fortunately, Indy is a quick learner. She understands the value of discretion, loyalty, and keeping family business within the family. Family business. As if murder and money laundering were just unfortunate necessities of modern life. After Victor and his men left, Aldric walked me to my room, his hand warm on the small of my back. You did well tonight, he said. Victor was impressed. I'm glad, I said, though the words tasted like ash in my mouth. He shared some interesting information during our conversation, Aldric continued, stopping outside my bedroom door. It seems there's been some federal interest in certain shipping operations. Nothing to worry about immediately, but it does suggest that we may need to accelerate some of our timelines. Accelerate timelines. What did that mean for me? Victor also mentioned that he's had to deal with similar federal attention in the past, Aldric said, his voice taking on that casual tone that always preceded his most dangerous statements. He found that having a federal investigation conclude with the tragic death of a key witness can be very effective at cooling bureaucratic enthusiasm. My mouth went dry. A key witness? Someone close to the investigation. Someone whose death would be particularly tragic and personal for the investigators involved. Aldric's hand moved to cup my face, almost tenderly. Victor was quite impressed when I mentioned that my wife has been cultivating friendships with several law enforcement families. The pieces clicked together in my mind with sickening clarity. The mayor's wife had mentioned FBI agents. I'd reported that information to Aldric. And now he was suggesting that someone connected to those agents might need to die to derail the investigation. Someone like me. Aldric, I said carefully, you're not suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything, he interrupted gently. I'm simply noting that Victor has given me a great deal of food for thought. But let's not worry about business tonight, darling. We have more pleasant matters to discuss. His hand slid from my face to my throat, not quite a caress, and not quite a threat. I think it's time we moved to the next phase of our relationship, he said. You've proven your value as an intelligence asset. Now I'd like to explore your other talents. I knew this moment was coming, had been dreading it for weeks, but somehow I still wasn't prepared for the cold calculation in his voice as he discussed using my body the same way he discussed using my social connections. "I'm not ready," I said quietly. Aldric's hand tightened slightly around my throat. "Ready is a luxury you can't afford, my dear. You see, Victor's visit tonight wasn't entirely social. He's considering a partnership that would be very lucrative for both of us, but it requires a certain level of commitment from me." "What kind of commitment?" "The kind that demonstrates I have complete control over my assets, including my wife." His thumb traced over my pulse point. "Victor is old-fashioned. He believes a man who can't manage his own household can't be trusted with serious business." I thought about Victor's cold eyes, his talk of wives who'd had accidents, his assessment of me as either wise or dangerous. "And if I refuse?" Aldric's smile was almost sad. "Then I'll be forced to demonstrate my commitment in other ways. Your sister is still in our care, after all, and your mother's treatment is so expensive." The threat was clear. Sleep with him willingly, or watch my family suffer. "I understand," I whispered. "Good girl." He leaned forward and pressed a kiss to my forehead that felt like a benediction and a condemnation all at once. "Tomorrow night, we'll have the house to ourselves. I've sent Cordelia and the other staff away for the weekend. No witnesses. No one to hear me scream. Sleep well, darling. Tomorrow begins a new chapter in our marriage." After he left, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the massive diamond on my finger and feeling the weight of the tracker inside the band. Tomorrow night, Aldric would rape me. There was no point in calling it anything else, no matter how he dressed it up in terms of partnership and commitment and marriage. But as I sat there in the darkness, I realized something had changed in me over the past few weeks. The naive girl who'd signed a prenuptial agreement for money was gone, replaced by someone harder, someone who'd learned to lie and spy and manipulate. Someone who'd learned that survival sometimes required becoming a monster yourself. I pulled out my phone and sent a single text to a number Helena Morrison had given me weeks ago, a number I'd memorized but never used. "Tomorrow night. The house will be empty except for us. If you're going to help me, it has to be now." Then I deleted the message, turned off my phone, and began to plan. If Aldric Thornwell thought I was just another victim to be used and discarded, he was about to learn that some victims bite back. And some of us have very sharp teeth. The next day crawled by with agonizing slowness. I went through the motions of my normal routine: breakfast in the morning room, a workout in the mansion's private gym, an afternoon by the pool, all while my mind raced through potential scenarios for the evening. By mid-afternoon, the staff had cleared out as Aldric had promised. Cordelia gave me a long, knowing look as she left, and I wondered if she understood what was about to happen. If she'd seen this pattern play out before with Vivian, with Catalina. "Have a pleasant evening, Mrs. Thornwell," she said, and there was something in her voice that might have been pity. I spent the remaining hours before sunset exploring parts of the mansion I'd never been allowed to access before. With the security staff gone, I had unprecedented freedom to move around, and I intended to use it. The East Wing, which had been strictly off-limits since my first day, contained Aldric's private office, a room filled with filing cabinets and computers that would take weeks to search properly. But I wasn't looking for evidence tonight. I was looking for weapons. In a room that might once have been a study, I found what I was looking for: an antique letter opener with a blade sharp enough to be dangerous. I slipped it into the evening gown I'd chosen for dinner, the weight of it against my thigh both terrifying and comforting. As the sun set, I made my way to the dining room where Aldric was waiting. He'd dressed for the occasion in a silk shirt and expensive slacks, and candles flickered on the table set for two. Under different circumstances, it might have been romantic. "You look beautiful," he said, rising to pull out my chair. "That dress is perfect for tonight." The dress was midnight blue silk, chosen specifically because it was fitted enough to be flattering but loose enough to hide the letter opener strapped to my thigh. "Thank you," I said, accepting a glass of wine that I had no intention of drinking. I needed to stay alert tonight. Dinner was a surreal experience. Aldric played the role of the charming host, discussing art and literature and current events, as if this were a normal date between husband and wife. But underneath this civilized conversation was an undercurrent of anticipation, of a predator preparing to claim his prize. "I've been thinking about our conversation last night," I said as we finished the main course. "About Victor and his expectations." "Oh." Aldric raised an eyebrow. "And what conclusions have you reached?" "That you're right. A successful partnership requires trust and commitment from both parties." Aldric's smile widened. "I'm so glad you understand. Victor will be pleased to hear about your enthusiasm for our arrangement." "Our arrangement?" As if rape were just another business transaction. "Actually," I said, setting down my fork and meeting his gaze directly, "I have a proposal." "I'm listening." "If we're going to make this marriage real, I want something in return." Aldric's expression sharpened. "Such as?" "I want to see my sister. In person, not just in videos. I want to know she's really safe. That can be arranged. And I want to know the truth about your business with Victor. If I'm going to be part of this world, I need to understand what I'm signing up for." Aldric was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. "You're more clever than I initially gave you credit for, Indy." "Very well. After tonight, I'll arrange for you to see Blue. And I'll explain the full scope of my operations." "Thank you." I reached across the table and took his hand, letting my fingers trace over his knuckles. "I appreciate your honesty." His hand turned under mine, capturing my fingers. "Honesty is the foundation of any good marriage. Which is why I should tell you something else." My heart rate spiked, but I kept my expression calm. "What's that?" "I know about your conversation with Helena Morrison at the gala." The world tilted sideways. He knew. Somehow, he knew about the powder room meeting, about Vivian's letter, about everything. "I don't know what you mean," I said, but my voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. "The ladies' room on the 3rd floor. The manila folder. The rather touching story about Vivian's tragic death." Aldric's thumb rubbed across my knuckles almost gently. "Did you really think I wasn't watching you?" I tried to pull my hand away, but his grip tightened. "Here's what's going to happen," Aldric said, his voice taking on that reasonable tone that was more terrifying than shouting would have been. "You're going to tell me exactly what Helena Morrison told you. Then you're going to help me retrieve whatever evidence Vivian thought she'd hidden. And then we're going to conclude this evening as planned." "And if I refuse?" Aldric pulled out his phone and showed me a video. My sister sat tied to a chair in what looked like a warehouse, her face streaked with tears. A man I didn't recognize held a gun to her head. "Blue has been asking about you," Aldric said conversationally. "She's quite worried about her big sister. It would be a shame if that worry turned out to be prophetic." I stared at the video, feeling my last hopes crumble. "You bastard. Now, let's keep this civilized." Aldric pocketed the phone. Victor's men are quite professional, but they can be impatient if kept waiting too long. I thought about the letter opener against my thigh, about Detective Raphael Morrison, who might or might not be coming to help me, about all the ways this night could go wrong. "What do you want to know?" I asked quietly. "Everything. Start with Helena's exact words." So I told him. About Vivian's letter, about the storage unit, about the pattern of dead wives. I told him about Detective Morrison and the ongoing investigation. I told him everything except the location of the storage unit, because that was the only card I had left to play. Aldric listened without interruption, his face revealing nothing. "Fascinating," he said when I finished. "Poor Vivian was more resourceful than I realized. And Helena has been more troublesome than I anticipated. Are you going to kill her too? That depends on how cooperative she chooses to be, and how cooperative you choose to be." Aldric stood and moved to my side of the table, his hand settling on my shoulder. "The storage unit, Indy. Where is it?" This was the moment of truth. If I told him, he'd retrieve the evidence and destroy it, eliminating the only proof of his crimes. But if I didn't tell him, Blue would die. "Secure space on Elm Street," I whispered. "Unit 247. "Thank you, darling. I'll send someone to collect Vivian's little insurance policy tonight." His hand slid from my shoulder to my throat. "Now then, shall we retire upstairs? I believe we have some marriage vows to consummate." I felt the letter opener's weight against my leg and made a split-second decision. Actually, I said, standing and moving closer to him. I was hoping we could start right here. Aldric's eyebrows rose in surprise. Here? In the dining room? I find danger exciting, I said, running my hand up his chest. And knowing that you're powerful enough to have people killed is surprisingly arousing. It was a gamble, playing into his ego and his assumption that all women could be seduced by power. But it worked. Aldric's grip on my throat became a caress. "My dear Indy," he murmured, "you continue to surprise me." I let him kiss me, let his hands roam over my body, let him believe he was winning. But when his attention was focused on the buttons of my dress, I slipped my hand to the letter opener. The blade slid free just as the dining room windows exploded inward. 3 men in tactical gear burst through the shattered glass, weapons drawn, shouting commands. In the chaos, I saw Aldric reach for something inside his jacket, and I didn't think, I just acted. The letter opener slid between his ribs with surprising ease. Aldric looked down at the blade protruding from his chest, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. "You little." He collapsed before he could finish the sentence, blood spreading across his white shirt like spilled wine. "Police." Nobody move. One of the tactical officers was removing his helmet, and I recognized the face from Helena Morrison's description. Detective Raphael Morrison, come to rescue me at exactly the right moment. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice professionally calm, but his eyes full of concern. I looked down at Aldric's body, at the blood on my hands, at the shattered remains of my carefully constructed new life. "No," I said, "I'm not hurt." But as the adrenaline faded and the reality of what I'd done sank in, I realized that wasn't entirely true. The naive girl who'd married for money was definitely dead. The question was, who had I become in her place? "Is it over?" I asked. Raphael Morrison looked at Aldric's body, at the evidence scattered across the dining room table, at the recordings that had been captured by the wire I hadn't known I was wearing. "For you?" "Yes," he said. "It's over." But as the police processed the crime scene and I gave my statement and tried to understand that I was free, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was less an ending than a transformation. I'd killed a man tonight, in self-defense, in defense of my family, in defense of other women who might have become his victims. But I'd still killed him, and somewhere in the darkness of the mansion that had been my prison, I'd found something I hadn't known I possessed, the capacity for violence, for deception, for survival at any cost. As they led me out of Aldric Thornwell's house for the last time, I realized that the girl who'd signed that prenuptial agreement was never coming back. The woman who walked away from that mansion was someone entirely new. Someone who'd learned that sometimes the only way to escape a monster is to become one yourself. 3 weeks later, I sat in a federal courthouse listening to prosecutors outline the scope of Aldric Thornwell's criminal empire. The evidence Vivian had hidden, combined with the recordings Raphael had captured and the testimony of various associates seeking plea deals, painted a picture of corruption that reached into every level of government and business. Viktor Kozlov had been arrested at the Canadian border, his attempt to flee the country thwarted by intelligence I'd helped gather during those dinner conversations. The mayor's office was under federal investigation. 3 judges had been suspended pending corruption charges, and a network of money laundering operations spanning multiple countries was being systematically dismantled. I should have felt vindicated. Justice was being served. The monsters were being brought to light. Instead, I felt empty. "How are you holding up?" Helena Morrison asked as we left the courthouse together. She'd become something like a surrogate mother to me in the weeks since Aldric's death, helping me navigate the legal complexities and emotional aftermath of my ordeal. "I'm fine," I said automatically, the same response I'd given to every therapist, prosecutor, and well-meaning friend who'd asked. "No, you're not," Helena said gently. "And that's okay." We walked in silence toward her car, past reporters who still occasionally tried to get statements about the Billionaire murder case, as the media had dubbed it. "The prosecutor said Victor's trial will probably result in life sentences," Helena said as we drove through the city. "The human trafficking charges alone will put him away forever." Human trafficking. That had been one of the worst revelations from the investigation. Aldric hadn't just laundered money. He'd been directly involved in smuggling people across borders, often women who ended up in situations not unlike my own. What about Blue? I asked. Still in protective custody until Victor's associates are rounded up. But she's safe. She's been asking to see you. I'd been avoiding my sister for weeks, unable to face her questions about what had really happened that night. How could I explain that I'd become someone capable of murder? How could I tell her that part of me didn't regret it? Indy, Helena said carefully. Raphael wanted me to ask you something. Detective Raphael Morrison had been my lifeline during the investigation, the one person who seemed to understand the psychological complexity of what I'd endured. But even he had started looking at me differently as more details emerged about how thoroughly I'd integrated into Aldric's operation. He wants to know if you'd be interested in consulting for the FBI. Your unique perspective on Thornwell's operations would be invaluable. The air in the car grew thick. Consulting. They wanted me to use the skills I'd learned in that gilded cage, the manipulation, the reading of people, the extraction of secrets for the good guys. They wanted to weaponize the monster Aldric had created. Consulting. I repeated, the word tasting foreign. Not as an agent, as an analyst, a consultant. You have insights no one else has, Indy. You lived it. You survived it. You could help prevent it from happening to someone else. I looked out the window at the city passing by. The same city where I'd been broke and desperate. The same city where I'd signed my life away. The same city where I'd killed a man. Who was I now? The victim? The survivor? The killer? The asset? The answer came not as a thought, but as a feeling. A cold, hard certainty that had been forged in Aldric's dining room. I'll think about it, I said, my voice quieter than I intended. Helena nodded, understanding the weight of the question. That's all anyone can ask. That night, back in the sterile safe house the FBI had provided, I finally agreed to see Blue. She arrived with a social worker, her blonde hair bright and clean, her eyes clear but shadowed with a trauma that hadn't been there before. For a long moment, we just stared at each other across the room. Then she ran to me, collapsing into my arms with a sob that shook her entire body. I'm sorry, Indy. I'm so sorry. It's not your fault, I whispered into her hair, holding her tight. None of it was your fault. It is. Kieran. I was so stupid. I almost got us both killed. I pulled back, cupping her face. Listen to me. Aldric Thornwell was a predator. He found people's weaknesses, and he exploited them. My weakness was money for mom's treatment. Yours was love for a boy who didn't deserve it. He would have found a way to get to us, no matter what. This was never about you or Kieran. This was always about him. The words were as much for me as they were for her. I needed to believe them. Did he? Blue's voice dropped to a whisper. Did he hurt you? The image of a letter opener sliding between Aldric's ribs flashed in my mind. The warm spray of blood on my hand. The look of utter shock on his face. He can't hurt anyone ever again, I said, which was the only truth I could offer. After Blue left, promising to return the next day, the emptiness returned. But it was different now. It wasn't just a void. It was a space waiting to be filled. With what I didn't know. Raphael Morrison visited me the following afternoon. He looked tired, the weight of the massive investigation evident in the lines around his eyes. Kozlov's singing like a canary, he said, accepting the cup of coffee I offered. Trying to cut a deal. He's confirming everything. The money laundering, the trafficking, the murders. Catalina Vasquez? I asked, the name from Vivian's letter feeling heavy on my tongue. Raphael nodded grimly. And two others we didn't know about. One in London, one in Hong Kong. Same pattern. Desperate women, short marriages, tragic accidents. 5 women. 5 lives erased for convenience and profit. The scale of it was numbing. He also confirmed something else, Raphael said, his gaze intense. About the night Aldric died. My heart stuttered. What? He said Aldric had called him that afternoon. Told him the asset had become a liability. that the federal attention was getting too close, and he needed a dramatic distraction. The room seemed to tilt. A distraction. Victor said Aldric's exact words were, "A grieving husband whose young wife was tragically killed by home intruders is a very powerful narrative. It cools investigations faster than ice." The truth hit me with the force of a physical blow. The empty house. The romantic dinner. It wasn't just about consummating the marriage or proving control to Victor. It was my final act. Aldric hadn't been preparing to rape me that night. He had been preparing to murder me. The letter opener. My desperate act of self-preservation. It hadn't been the beginning of his plan. It had been the thwarting of it. I hadn't escalated the violence. I had preempted it. The revelation didn't make me feel better. It made me feel colder, more calculated. The woman with the sharp teeth had been right to bite. "I need to show you something," Raphael said, pulling me from my thoughts. He led me to a table and opened a laptop. On the screen was a frozen image from a security camera, time-stamped the night of the gala. It showed the third-floor hallway outside the powder room. "I had a hunch," he said. "After what you told us about your meeting with my mother." We pulled all the security footage Aldric's team had archived. He pressed play. I watched myself slip into the ladies' room. A minute later, Helena entered. We were inside for nearly 15 minutes. The footage was silent, but the tension was palpable. Then Raphael fast-forwarded. The door opened. Helena left first. I waited a few minutes, then emerged, smoothing down my dress, my face a mask of calm terror. He paused the video. "Now watch." He rewound slightly and zoomed in on a decorative alcove farther down the hall. A shadow moved. A figure stepped partially into frame just as I exited the powder room. A man. He was holding a small, professional-grade video camera. He lowered it as I walked away, a satisfied smirk on his face. Jasper. Aldric's groundskeeper. His enforcer. "He was there the whole time," I whispered, my blood turning to ice. "He filmed us." "Not just filmed," Raphael said, his voice hard. "He recorded audio. We found the files on an encrypted server in Aldric's study. He heard everything. The storage unit. Vivian's letter. My mother's involvement. My investigation. He knew it all before he even confronted you at dinner." The entire conversation in the dining room, Aldric's calm questioning, his feigned surprise, it had all been a performance. A game. He already knew about the storage unit. He was toying with me, seeing how much I would confess, enjoying my fear before he carried out his final plan. The monstrousness of it was so complete, so absolute, that it finally shattered the icy numbness inside me. In its place rushed a torrent of pure, unadulterated rage. Not a hot, screaming rage, but a cold, silent, and infinitely more dangerous one. I saw it all with perfect, horrifying clarity. Aldric had never seen me as a person. I was a tool, a pawn, and finally, a prop in his narrative of tragic grief. I looked at Raphael, my vision sharpening until every detail in the room was crystalline. That consulting job. Tell me more. 6 months later. The conference room was quiet, sterile, and smelled of cheap coffee and anxiety. On my side of the table, me, a federal prosecutor, and Raphael Morrison. On the other, Victor Kozlov, his lawyer, and a U.S. Marshal. Victor looked older, diminished in his orange jumpsuit, but his eyes were still the same cold blue that had assessed me over dinner. "Mrs. Thornwell," he said, the title a mockery. "Mr. Kozlov," I replied, my voice even. "Calm." The prosecutor began, going over the terms of the plea deal once more. Life in a secure facility, no parole, in exchange for his full and complete testimony against the remaining members of his organization and the corrupt officials on Aldric's payroll. Victor listened, his expression bored. When the prosecutor finished, he waved a dismissive hand. "I know the terms. I am not a stupid man." "Then let's begin," the prosecutor said, clicking his pen. For an hour, Victor answered questions in his accented, matter-of-fact tone. He named names, described shipments, detailed money routes. He was thorough, cold, and completely detached from the human suffering his business had caused. Finally, the prosecutor looked at me. It was my turn. Mr. Kozlov, I began, leaning forward slightly. You told my late husband that a man who cannot manage his own household cannot be trusted with serious business. Do you remember that? A flicker of surprise in his cold eyes. He hadn't expected this line of questioning. I recalled the sentiment. Would you say you managed your household well? He shrugged. My wives were difficult. Catalina Vasquez? Was she difficult? His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She was disobedient. And your first wife? The one who had the accident? Was she disobedient too? This is not relevant, his lawyer interjected. It's completely relevant, I said, my voice still quiet, but it cut through the room. It speaks to his character, his patterns, his trustworthiness. The deal requires full cooperation. That includes answering my questions. The prosecutor nodded to Victor. Answer the question. Victor stared at me, and for the first time, I saw a spark of genuine emotion in his eyes. Hatred. She asked too many questions. About business that was not hers. Like I did. I asked. Like you did, he confirmed, his voice a low growl. But you were different. Thornwell thought you were a little bird. I saw it in your eyes that night at dinner. You were not a bird. You were a snake, waiting to strike. I held his gaze, not denying it, embracing it. You told Aldric that the death of a key witness could cool a federal investigation. Were you referring to me? A slow, grim smile spread across his face. He was going to make it beautiful, tragic. The world would have wept for him. The confirmation hung in the air, a final, ugly truth. Thank you, Mr. Kozlov, I said, leaning back. I have no further questions. I stood and walked out of the room, Raphael following close behind. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I had what I came for. Not just his confession on the record, but the look in his eyes when he realized the little bird had not only survived the snake pit, but had learned to thrive in it. Outside the federal building, the sun was shining. Blue was waiting for me, our mother sitting beside her in a wheelchair, a colorful blanket across her lap. The chemotherapy had been brutal, but the experimental treatment Aldric had secured, the one he'd used as leverage, had worked. She was in remission. Are you okay? Blue asked, searching my face. I'm good, I said, and for the first time I meant it. I knelt beside my mother's chair. How are you feeling today? Stronger, she said, her voice thin but clear. She reached out and touched my cheek, her eyes full of a wisdom that had come from staring down death. You look different, Indy. I am different, I said. And I was. The naive girl was gone. The terrified prisoner was gone. Even the furious survivor was fading. In her place was someone quieter. Someone who knew the cost of survival and had decided to pay it. Someone who understood that the world was full of monsters, and that sometimes the only way to walk in the sunlight was to know how to walk in the dark. I had taken the consulting job with the FBI. My first day was tomorrow. Raphael walked up beside me, handing me a coffee. He'll never see the outside of a cell again. You know that, right? I know, I said. It was over. The contracts, the threats, the fear. It was all over. But as I looked out at the city, I knew my work wasn't done. Somewhere out there, another Aldric Thornwell was looking for another desperate girl. Another Victor Kozlov was making a deal that would ruin lives. And now, I knew exactly how to find them. I slipped my hand into my pocket, my fingers brushing against the cool metal of the key Helena had given me that night in the powder room. The key to Vivian's storage unit. I'd never given it to Aldric. I'd given him a fake unit number. The evidence was still safe. It wasn't a weapon. It was a reminder of the women who came before me, a reminder of the woman I had become, a reminder that some victims don't just survive, they evolve. What did this story teach you about the hidden strengths we discover in our darkest moments? How do we reconcile the person we are with the person we have to become to survive? Drop your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories that will change how you see the world and yourself.